So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to run a regression analysis in SPSS. SPSS is pretty straightforward for running a regression model. You've read a tutorial on regression analyses, and this tutorial that I'm showing you right now on the webcast just kind of summarizes it or shows it in real time. So I'm going to be working with the K-12 example data for this tutorial. I'll also have a new data file for the folks doing the community college, because you'll notice I have added two variables to my file. So you'll recall originally that the K-12 example had unique ID, assessment period, and then 6 ratings. I've added two variables here so that we can actually start working with some regression models. And these two values are really straightforward. So the first one is the scale score metric. This is a value that is essentially the theta estimate, which you should be familiar with from your Module 6 on IRT. This is the single score that predicts all of these rating scores. So I'll just show you what it looks like in data view. The scale score metric is a value that if I plug it into that formula, that theta formula that I've been talking about and that you've been reading about, you would actually see the probability of getting one of these responses. And that theta estimate in this case is based on a partial credit Roche model, and you can look up what the formula is if that is of interest to you. So the other thing that you'll notice is then I rescaled it. Sometimes working with a theta estimate can be tricky because it involves negative numbers. So I simply rescaled it so that we wouldn't be working with any negative numbers. And what this is essentially a linear transformation, scale score report of this theta estimate. And what that does is lets us think of the values outside of a negative positive range. So in this example, I rescaled it so that it's a reportable scale score. So something that you would see on a statewide assessment or in a standardized test. This is essentially a standardized score. And I'm not going to go into how I calculated that right now, because I want to simply show the regression model and how to do a regression analysis. So I'm going to go back to variable view. You'll notice that my scale score metric is coded as a scale measure. You'll also notice that my scale score report is coded as a scale measure. I've labeled these as the logit value of the scale score. This is also the same thing as theta. If I wanted to put that in there, I could say the theta value of the scale score. Whatever, just some way for me to keep track of it. The other thing that you'll notice is that I have the label for the scale score report. So your data file should look very similar to this. I've done this for both of the data files and that we've been using in the class. So let's go ahead and run a regression model. So it's really simple. I'm going to go up here to Analyze, Regression, and I'm going to select a linear regression. The dependent value that I'm interested in looking at in this particular case is my reportable scale score. So what I'm going to do is make this dependent. So I'm modeling my reportable scale score as a function of maybe, let's say, two variables. So I'm going to ask you guys to go through and select for your assignment 1, 2, or 3 variables to look at and create a regression model for. So I'm just going to model how to do that right now. So I click my control button and I have 2 selected. I'll take idea and content rating, and I enter those into my independent variable. Selection, case, and weighting I'm not going to worry about right now. I'm going to go over here to statistics, and I'm just going to ask it to estimate regression coefficients and model fit, and I think I'm going to go ahead and ask it to estimate the R-squared, which is of course something that you should recognize from the model diagnostics. I'm going to click continue, and then I'm also going to want to save unstandardized and standardized predicted values and unstandardized and standardized residuals. I'll show you what this does in a second. Nothing else looks particularly interesting to me right now on this menu for linear regression. All right, I'm going to click continue, and then I'm going to simply click OK. All right, so here is the screen that you should be familiar with from your written tutorial. And what this is doing is showing you that there were essentially two variables, ID and content, and organization, that were used to predict the reportable scale score. So my predictors are organization, and then the ID and content, and then a reportable scale score. Now, what this is saying in my R-square value is that about 81% of the variance in my dependent variable reportable scale score is attributed to these two predictors. And then I look down here and I can find my unstandardized and my standardized coefficients. So if I were actually making a formula that said values of these two predictors times a coefficient would essentially yield a predicted value of my reportable scale score. It's pretty straightforward. You can also see that in the standardized coefficient that tells us essentially what's a better predictor of a reportable scale score, and in this case ID and content has a higher predictive validity or a higher predictive factor over the other predictor, which is organization. So based on your tutorial, I would like for you to now go ahead and run a regression model and simply interpret it for me. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking about this because the point of this tutorial was to really just show you how to make sure to show you how to run the regression model to make sure that you could analyze this data based on a simple regression model for your assignment. And again, really to run the regression model, you can just go over here to Analyze, Regression, Linear.